Well, hello, everybody. Today I have with me Kenneth Jones, a playwright from New York City, and we are doing a world premiere of his play, Hollywood, Nebraska. So, Kenneth, before we get started, first I'd love to hear about kind of how you became a playwright and uh, why you kind of decided to become a playwright and whatnot.
Well, I became a playwright sort of through a back path, not sort of the natural way one becomes a playwright. I knew very early in my life that I wanted to write creatively. I just didn't know how to make money at that. I didn't know how to do it, and I knew I loved the theater. Um, and I thought the way to sort of get into the theater was to write about it and to be a journalist. And I became an arts writer and a theater critic very early on. And that means reading every play you can get your hands on and seeing as many plays as possible and digesting the great plays of world literature. So I became a critic. And during that time, I was not a playwright. I was solely committed to being a theater critic. I don't think that I should be pitching my plays to theaters that I'm writing about. I think there's a conflict of interest there.
Mhm.
But for 15 years, I was a theater critic in Detroit. I was a theater critic for the Detroit News and other papers there. I moved to New York City and got a job at Playbill magazine. So I was an editor and a writer at playbill.com and wrote about every Broadway and off-Broadway show for another 13 years. And during that time in New York, I decided to sort of start to be a creative writer. I was no longer a critic. I was really just an arts reporter at that point, and started writing lyrics and musicals and plays. And it sort of got me to the point that I'm at now, which is first with a play called Alabama Story, which Lamb Theater did so beautifully a few years ago. And now this new play, Hollywood, Nebraska, and a bunch of other plays as well. I'm strictly a playwright now. The great thing about being a theater critic is that I absorbed all this information about dramatic structure and character, dialogue, and it just was inside of me. It was a great master's degree program over 25 years where I was just absorbing and absorbing. Um, so I got a degree in journalism, and I got a degree, a sort of minor or concentrated study in theater and film history. But then I just sort of switched gears.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. And I think that's one thing that I love about theater in general too is that like you're never like pigeonholed to kind of one thing either. Is like it's just an ever kind of growing process and community. And it's like, oh yeah, it's like you can try your hand at this and you go, all right, I don't like that very much. You go, oh, I love this. This is a passion of mine. And then you grow into it. And yeah, that's really
Yeah,
awesome.
I think that's one of the great lessons for theater students is you think you're going to be an actor, or maybe you think you're going to be a director, but maybe your skill set really is to be a marketing manager or in PR or back of house or front of house. So, there's a lot of ways to make a career in the theater and doesn't have to be just being a star. And if you're an actor, um, don't concentrate on being a star, concentrate on being an actor and a working actor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. That's really great. Um, so now I'd love to talk to you about your play, Hollywood, Nebraska, which, like I said, we are part of a rolling world premiere, one of three theaters. Is that correct? That's doing the world premiere of it during this time. That's awesome. So yeah, I'd love to ask about kind of your own version of, if you had to kind of describe the show, a synopsis, if you will, and then kind of what your inspirations were and kind of how you came to write this.
Yeah, well, Hollywood, Nebraska is a comedy. It's set in a small town in far western Nebraska. It's about two actresses who are in their 40s who have had careers of their own and left this small town years ago. And they come back the same week in uh, September in the fall. And they're there to address separate family emergencies. One of them works in Hollywood and she's back because her mother has had an accident. Another actress works in New York and she comes back because her father has died. And they happen to come back the same weekend to sort of face who they are and face what they became and what they want. It's a coming of age. It's not a coming of age story, but it's a coming home story. I really wanted to write a classic coming home story. What happens to us when we go home? We have to face our families and our friends and who we were, and I think that that's just great soil for drama. And in the small town, they meet two guys who are in town who are unlikely romances for them. They reconnect with their dreams, their past dreams, and try to reconcile the past and the present. It sounds a little dark, but it's actually really very funny and light and filled with a lot of hope. There's a lot of loss in this world. This small town they're in, which is inspired by a real town in western Nebraska, is sort of always called a dying town. But I'm much more interested in the life of the town and the people in the town and the blood flow in the town and passions, aspirations. So it's a very aspirational play in a lot of ways. And I think ultimately it gets to a really hopeful spot.
Gotcha. Yeah, and one thing, because I've read your play, and it's funny. I'm actually from a not necessarily super small town in Nebraska, but I do come from Nebraska, and so there are several things that I can definitely attest to when reading it. I'm like, yep, I definitely feel that way. Especially there's like a scene in the supermarket and whatnot with a couple of the characters, and I'm like, yeah, I definitely feel that sometimes when I go home. I'm like, oh man, I'm like, please don't look at me. I'm like, it's been a few years since I talked to you or whatever. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be awkward. Here we go and stuff. But it really is truly a very funny. It has so much romance and so much heart to it as well. I'm very excited for Lamb to be putting it on. It's gonna be so great.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited that it's set in the Midwest, and this is the first theater in the Midwest to do it. It did have a workshop in Wyoming, in a small town in Wyoming, in Sheridan, Wyoming. And people went crazy for it because it was exactly the world they knew, those small grocery stores and, the towns where there's one diner. But Lamb Theater is doing the full world premiere of it. And I think you're going to get a lot of references. Your audiences are going to really, if you don't know what Dorothy Lynch salad dressing is, I mean, you will now. But that's a very Midwestern thing, a very Nebraska thing that I'd never heard of. I grew up in Michigan. I don't know what Dorothy Lynch is. Do you know Dorothy Lynch?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't have to tell you.
Yeah.
And cabbage burgers, and there's tons of food references in this. I love to put a lot of food references in my plays in general. It's a very sensual and sensuous thing to talk about food. So there's going to be a lot of recognizable Midwestern stuff in the play.
Awesome. One thing also that I love about it is I know there's a conversation between two characters at one point where they talk about, one of them is like, oh, I got to go back east. I need to travel back east. And the other character who's from the town is like, oh, like Omaha east? And is like, no, like more east than that, and stuff. So
Right.
it's really fun, and it's sweet, that you have so many references to the Midwest, whether or not you live in Nebraska or Iowa. And I'm sure really even you don't even have to live in the Midwest to be able to appreciate all of these beautiful subtleties that you've written about. Because regardless whether it's the Midwest or not, we can all relate to the kind of these struggles, these human struggles that we go through, and also these experiences that we have between people. We're like, oh, that was awkward, or that was funny, or that was cute and sweet. But it is very exciting and touching that we do have the pleasure of being a Midwest theater company and getting to do this show.
There was a talk back at one of the readings of the play, and the question was, what do you feel after seeing this play? And a woman raised her hand and said, it makes me want to call my mother. And I love that. I think that's very a beautiful thought.
Yeah. No, that's really awesome. That's very beautiful. So do you have any, do you have any inspirations, I guess, that kind of brought about doing this production?
Yeah, a couple. The jumping off point of this play was my visiting a town called Kimball, Nebraska, in the panhandle of Nebraska. My in-laws lived there.
Okay.
And it was partly sparked by my mother-in-law, who said that she raised her kids to go away and have lives beyond their small town, not in a way that denigrated the town, but rather you raise your kids to fly. You don't raise them necessarily to stay around. I thought that was a great statement. But I also wondered what it might be like to write about a personality where the mother says, sure, go to school, but I want you back here. It's selfish in a way, but it's also dear in a way. It's really lovely and heartbreaking in some ways. And it just shows a profound need. So I wanted to write about a mother who had an expectation that her kid might be around more, maybe even staying in town. And even though the kid wanted to go to acting school and there's no opportunities in far western Nebraska to be an actor, you know, couldn't she have opened a playhouse in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, or in Cheyenne, or in Pine Bluffs, or in Gearing, or Sydney, or so I wanted to write about that. That interested me because there's tension there. So the daughter comes home, and there's instant conflict, and conflict is drama, right?
Oh yeah.
And I fell in love with this small town. There's a derelict hotel called the Wheat Growers Hotel, and there are grain silos, and there's there's one supermarket. It's one stoplight. It's not a world that I grew up in. I grew up in the sort of generic suburbs of Detroit. So I was fascinated by this small town and wanted to write about that world and the conflict of small town versus big town. A character named Jane goes to Hollywood. A character named Andrea goes to New York City. These are very different worlds than Kimball, Nebraska. In my play, it's called Hatcher, Nebraska. I fictionalized it, but it's a town of 2,400 people. So that's sort of the launching point of the play. And I wanted to write a love letter to small towns and theater people and theater and creative people. I didn't get to this point until later, but I really realized I was writing about creativity in general. What is the creative impulse in everybody? I don't mean just show business people and actors and painters and dancers and designers. I mean, like, what is the impulse of a woman in a small town to be creative? What does that mean? Does that mean gardening? Does that mean knitting? Does that mean bake sales? Does that, all creativity is valuable. And eventually sort of the message underneath all of this play is the creative impulse and the integrity of that and the beauty of that. It's a lesson that has to be learned by the two actresses who think that they are representative of great creativity, the apogee of creativity. And that's, people change by the end of the play. And as you know, Brock, everybody wants someone who changes by the end of the play. If you're the same thing at the end of the play, it's not much of a play. Yeah. So I wanted to just write a love letter to creative people and creativity and that creative impulse. And ultimately you can mark everybody as being a creator in the play, not just these two kind of arrogant actresses who come into town. They have egos. They're not arrogant, but they certainly have a feeling of superiority on some level. Yeah, and that has to change, I think.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and you have absolutely written a very beautiful play that is completely about that. So I guess one question I have for you is, what is it like? And it doesn't necessarily have to just be about this specific play either. But what is it like as a playwright writing, a show and then, having other theaters work on it, especially because this piece right now is not produced through a publishing company yet. So, and I mean, even once it is, you can still make, additions and whatnot and changes. But yeah, I guess what is that process like of, having theaters work on it and you go, ooh, I have this new idea and I want to make changes and whatnot.
Yeah, this is a rare and really exciting chance to essentially preview my play at 3 different venues. It's being done at the Oak Ridge Playhouse in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, at Lamb Theater in Sioux City, and at a small theater called Wetumpka Depot Players in Wetumpka, Alabama. Um, uh, it's a chance to, it's a listening opportunity. Every place is a listening opportunity. I happen to be in attendance for the Tennessee previews and the Tennessee rehearsal process. I think there'll be some rewrites in rehearsal. I'm going to email some of those rewrite ideas to Russ Woolley at Lamb Theater, the director, and see if that can fit into your production. When it's done in Alabama next year, the things we learn from Iowa and Tennessee will then go into that script. So it's a very influx and fluid experience. I do think, I don't know that there's major surgery to be done on the play, but there's definitely going to be some sharpening. I even sent Russ some pages last week, and there's a new scene going into Act 1. So it's super exciting just to throw ideas at directors and to get feedback and really experiment and just try to make it tighter and leaner and smarter and clearer. So that I've been very, very lucky to have this premiere. The Rolling World premiere, as we call it, came about because both Lamb Theater and Oak Ridge Playhouse at the same time wrote to me and said, I think we want to do your play coming out of the pandemic because it's about home and love and creativity. And I said, it's great. Can we do a rolling world premiere? Do you mind a concurrent world premiere? And I'm very lucky that both theaters said yes. So it's just a blessing, and I'm super excited to keep learning about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's wonderful. So I think kind of one of my last questions is, as a playwright, do you have any advice for anybody who may be an aspiring playwright someday, or is maybe working at it and they're trying to kind of hone their craft? If you have any advice or anything like that.
Yeah. I would say to those people who are interested in being playwrights that there's a huge obligation to see as many plays as possible. You have to go to plays, whether that's community theater, professional theater, going out of town, coming out to Broadway. You don't have to go to Broadway to be a playwright. I grew up in Michigan. I saw national tours and community theater and regional, resident, professional, equity and non-equity theater. You just have to get your hands on as much theater as possible. And one of the great resources is to go to universities and colleges, which have theater programs. I went to the library all the time and I read every play I could get my hands on. I remember one summer I read all of Tennessee Williams' plays in my library in Birmingham, Michigan. And the next summer I read all of Edward Albee's plays. You just have to be disciplined and read and to try to write as much as possible. I don't write every day. A lot of people do sit down and write every day, but you do have to write. I think reading books about how to be a playwright can be helpful. I think you have to digest the great plays that were written. So if you don't know the plays of Shakespeare or Chekhov or Ibsen, all of whom are mentioned in my play, actually, Ibsen and Chekhov are big parts of this play. Don't be scared, it's very clear. Tennessee Williams, Eugene O'Neill, August Wilson, Wendy Wasserstein. I mean, you have to get your hands on plays. So I think just being in love with the theater helps. Yeah. I remember when I was younger, I would read plays and see plays and even see films, and I would keep a journal and write half a page about what this play is about, what it's trying to be, to what extent the production succeeds in telling the story. And it disciplined me to look for structure and look for goals in plays. So that's a really long answer. Sorry, but that's...
No, it's a wonderful answer. That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that, and I agree completely, right? Is like, I always talk about that theater. I think one of the biggest things, especially that people don't realize, is how much like research goes into theater in general. Whether you're acting, you're directing, you're writing, of just, you're always researching and you're always trying to hone your craft by learning more. That you can only get better if you're willing to learn and expand.
Yeah.
So, so Ken, what is your, I know you have an official website in case anybody would love to go and check out, kind of your bio and other shows that you've written and stuff like that. What is the name of your website?
It's by KennethJones.com, by KennethJones.com. So yeah, my bio's up there, and there's some information about my plays. I've got some other stuff brewing, and Alabama Story finally got published. So that's published by Dramatist Play Service and is licensable all over the country. It's going to happen in Tampa next year. It's opening this month in Roswell, Georgia. It makes its Georgia premiere. It's had about 40 productions so far. So it's open. It's available for licensing to community theaters and universities and high schools have done it. You guys did the Iowa premiere. Yep. So it's good. I'm working on a bunch of stuff right now and excited.
Awesome. That's exciting. Well, I think that pretty much sums up everything we have. But again, Hollywood, Nebraska opens up at Lamb Theater on September 16th and will run through October 2nd. So please come watch this grand opening world premiere of the show. And we're so excited to be working with playwright Kenneth Jones. So thank you.
Thank you, Brock. Break a leg.
Hey, thank you.